You're listening to Business Beyond the Launch, and I'm your host, Mary Sweetman. Each month, I'll be inviting extraordinary business owners to share their unfiltered stories of growth, challenge and triumph. So turn the volume up, grab yourself a coffee, and let's hear from our special guest. Hi, and welcome to Business Beyond the Launch. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to our first guest, Hayley Lumby.
Thank you, Mary. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for inviting me to your very first podcast.
No, thank you for coming. So, Gary, the reason why I brought you is because not only have you helped many businesses across the UK, probably around the world, with their business growth strategies, but you've also helped us and the team at Co-Galaxy. And so some of the things that I wanted to discuss with you today and just kind of pick your brains on is kind of how do businesses kind of scale and grow beyond the launch?
Yeah, it is a millennium problem, really, to tell the truth, because as we know, 2 out of 3 startups fail, and getting to some milestones as a SME business is quite challenging. I'm sure you know that from Co-Galaxy. You know, getting to $500,000, then getting to $1 million is really a big step. But once you break through that step and get to that £1 million plus turnover, surprisingly, things become a bit easier because you've got scale. You know, you've got experience of getting there. So I think a lot of businesses struggle to make that initial step to those levels, and there's various strategies and tactics that they can adopt to help them get to that point. Many of them fail to investigate those strategies, fail to get advice, fail to seek guidance. Quite lonely running a business, as you know, but ultimately if they got that advice, got that guidance and took those steps, which involves risk. You can't grow a business without risk taking. Entrepreneurs are risk takers by their very nature, but it's surprising how many business owners are risk averse and actually don't like taking too much risk, and that slows their growth down. So if they thought about all those things, I'm sure more SMEs would succeed.
No, and I completely agree. So I remember when I first met you, Gary, and one of the conversations that we had was about growing, about that risk as well. And I remember you saying, well, what is the end point? And you start to think of the future and you start to look at kind of like, what do you want to achieve financially? What do you want to achieve as a business? And sometimes you don't realise what that end point is until you kind of open your mind up. And I remember one of the conversations being like, there's a specific number that we want to achieve and like a certain date. And then you were like, well, have you even considered about acquiring other businesses rather than just selling out? And acquisition was something that I'd never considered as a growing smaller business. You don't realise that that even is an opportunity. So what would you say to any businesses that are kind of maybe at that point where they're growing, but maybe are just looking at the sellout point rather than how they can accelerate that growth rather than just having something that just stops?
There's a couple of things there, isn't there? First of all, the difference between growing organically, which is absolutely the prime focus of every business and should be. First and foremost, grow what you've got rather than look to grow by acquisition only. But also have an end game in mind, I suppose, an end point in mind. Whether that's exit, whether that's succession planning, whether it's keeping it to some sort of part ownership, or even elevating yourself to non-executive chairman or non-executive director of your own business. There's many different ways to cut it, and you're right, a lot of SME owners don't even think about exit, and that's a shame, because actually what they need to be thinking about is getting themselves and getting their businesses ready. For some point in time they'll want to exit that business in some way, shape or form. The earlier you start getting your business in shape for that exit point, the better, because the more time you've got to make it more valuable by putting the right building blocks in place. And I always say to my clients, and you'll remember this, is that build a business that's not reliant on you. In other words, make yourself dispensable to your own business. It's hard to do, hard to think about even, but you've got to, because your business will be more valuable, more sellable, if it's not reliant totally on you. That you've built a management team with great people in it that can actually run that business with you not being there. Because you want to take holidays, you want to go away, you want to focus on strategy, you don't just want to focus on operations or sales. So ultimately, that's the first thing I would do. Start thinking about an exit and a timeline. Thinking about what sort of valuation would you like to achieve with your business and how much do you need to live on once your business is finished. And also don't necessarily think that's a full sale. It could be a partial sale. You could still be very much involved in that business. There's different ways. So going back to your other point about acquisition, something many SME business owners don't think about because they think that's something that's not for them because they're too small. And how do they find a business to buy in the first place? Many of them haven't got an idea where to start for that. But what I would say is that having focused on organic growth and getting growth going organically by investing in people, by investing in sales and marketing, by making sure that you've got the great customer service and backed up by good technology. Once you've got that organic growth going, you then want to think, well, can we accelerate that growth somehow? Not just by exporting, for example, that's one avenue you could go along, but also by potentially acquiring another business to bolt onto your business to make that growth accelerate. People are put off because is that risky? Yes, it is risky, but you spend time researching, you spend time finding the right business to buy, and more importantly, why you want to buy it. And I think that's a real key thing to get good advice around. Is it that we want to buy a business because there's potentially cross-sell and upsell between each other's client bases? Is it because it gets you into a new geography very quickly? It's hard setting up in a new geography, in a new office from scratch with no customers, rather than actually buying a business with customers, with staff, ready-made, if you like. Yes, you've got to make sure you get the right one and it's profitable and you can add value to it to create profitability even more. But actually, quite often that's easier to do than actually starting up from afresh. I mentioned people there, acquiring talent. Trying to acquire and retain talent has probably been the number one challenge businesses has faced since COVID. Because COVID got employees thinking differently. People want to work from home, people want hybrid working, they want more money. The cost of living crisis didn't help with that respect. So ultimately, buying a business to acquire talent is also a really good point. If you can see a business that's got talent in it and that would work in your business as well as the business they're in, well, maybe that's a good reason to buy a business in its own right. So there's plenty of reasons. Don't let finance put you off. And I know you want to talk about finance, but ultimately, funding and acquisition, there's many ways to do it, and probably too many ways to cover it all in this podcast. But again, it's about getting the right advice early enough. But quite often you could fund a purchase in part by the assets that are in the business that you're buying, whether that's debtors or whether it's fixed assets or premises. Quite often there's some of those available that you could use to fund that acquisition. And of course, when you buy a business, you never buy it fully on day one. You never pay in full on day one. You agree a price and the shareholding is passed over on day one, but probably the most you ever pay on day one is 50% of the full valuation. The other 50% is paid over 1, 2, 3 years from the profits of the business that you're buying. So it's almost self-funding in a way. People don't realise that, and that's why, again, I go back to people needing to take the right advice.
No, I really like that point about getting that right advice, which you've been a part of many businesses with those acquisition kind of processes. Would you say you are better to buy a competitor or someone who's not even someone who's in your kind of industry, but someone that kind of complements what you do? Or is it just great to look at kind of like what your business is and start to see who might be the best opportunity for where you're trying to grow to?
It's a really good question. And there isn't one answer, unfortunately. I wish there was. It very much depends on you and your business and what you're looking for. Some businesses I've worked with go on a buy and build strategy. They just buy other businesses to bolt onto theirs because all they want to do is to get to a certain size and then sell out. But quite often most businesses look for synergies. And as I alluded to earlier, usually a lot of businesses start with sector specific synergies. So in your case, you would buy another software business that perhaps had different type of developers than you've got. It might have different type of clients than you've got. They might have a specialism in law, for example, or, law software or accountancy software. You maybe don't have that, and therefore by buying that business, you can expand your customer base, expand your knowledge, expand your workforce, expand into a different location, all under one purchase of one business. And it would be really difficult to do that if you didn't do it by acquisition, but did it by organic and growth over time. So it gets you to the end point more quickly. Is there more risk? Yes, there clearly is more risk, because no matter what due diligence you do when you buy a business, that's usually tax due diligence, legal due diligence, and financial due diligence. Sometimes you don't uncover everything, and sometimes when you're in a new business you just bought and lift the bonnet up and get stuck into it, things come out of the woodwork that you didn't realise was there. And ultimately some of those are good and some of those can be bad. So there's nothing 100% guaranteed, but by doing that due diligence properly, by getting good advisors to do it, help you do it on your behalf, you minimise the risk by doing your research, by making sure that the business that you're buying is not over-reliant on the seller, and if it is, then keep that seller involved for a period of time until it's immersed in your business. I would always say the most difficult thing about buying a business is not finding it, it's not finding the finance, it's actually integrating it into your own business. It takes many months. I think business owners sometimes fail to realise that the owner or the directors, or certainly the management team, quite often have to be involved significantly, and that often means working out of a different location where the other business is based for a significant period of time. I would say to integrate any business into another business that you've acquired is probably going to take you a minimum of 12 months.
Yeah. So what are the challenges usually that you find when you are integrating? Do you treat them as two separate entities that they once were? How does that work if you are trying to merge them together? Like, especially when you're talking about people, different cultures, obviously the different assets that you've got within the companies. How does that work, and what are the challenges businesses face?
I think you've got to think differently about different structures. First of all, you can do. One of my clients recently did a merger with another business. So that merger involved giving a certain percentage of shares away of his business to the other business owner in exchange for bringing all that business on board. He didn't buy the company. He really bought the client base and bought the expertise within the business. He didn't end up, so the business didn't come over. The assets of the business came over. And in exchange, the owner of that business got a partial share in the other business. So that's a part merger. It wasn't 50-50 because the businesses were different sizes. So ultimately that was a part merger. You could obviously then buy the shares of a company, and ultimately you've got to focus on making sure that what you are paying for is what you get. And the valuation of a business is quite often the sticking point between two individuals or two companies where they don't agree on the value. It's your advisor's job to make it as cheap as possible, and it's their advisor's job to make it as expensive as possible. But generally speaking, it's a subject of negotiation, and if there's a willingness on both sides, you should get to a win-win rather than a win-lose situation. I'm not quite sure whether I answered your question there, but yeah. By all means, come back to me with it again if I didn't.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's really interesting. And I just like how you've mentioned quite a lot about getting that advice. And I think advice is so important. And I think as a growing business, and one that's taking big decisions and taking those risks, having that external support, what would you say is someone who has supported many businesses as a non-exec director, including Co-Galaxy, what would you say about taking that external advice? Like, why is that important rather than just being quite insular?
Yeah, well, as you know, it's lonely running a business, as I said. So, and you've got Nick, your husband, alongside you. So you're lucky. A lot of business owners don't have that benefit of working alongside their spouse or their partner in a business, and therefore they've got to make all the decisions by themselves. And we all make mistakes when we make decisions. Nobody's infallible. So having, 2 heads or 3 heads rather than one is much better. I think you've got to be careful about choosing the people you want to take advice from. In terms of acquisition, you would definitely take advice from a corporate finance advisor, from your lawyer. In terms of growing your business, you probably wouldn't speak to your bank manager, even if you could find one, by the way, which you probably can't at the moment. And you probably wouldn't speak to your lawyer. You'd want to go out and find somebody such as myself, who's been involved in many businesses and actually grown them and successfully sold them, and so that you're getting the experience, the knowledge, the expertise from that individual to help your company achieve that organic and also potentially that acquisition growth. Choosing the right individual is not easy. You've got to make sure that there's rapport between you. I think we've always had rapport. I think making sure that they've got the right experience in the background. It's interesting that some people who take advice want advice from people within their specific sector. And there's nothing wrong with that, because you're looking there for potential industry contacts. You're looking there for specific advice around your industry and your sector. So you can go down that route. You, like many others of my clients, went down for more. Yes, I've got a finance background, so you could say, I've got a finance expertise, but I also work with you on sales and marketing. I work with you on people. I work with you on risk management and M&A. So ultimately, I would say, think about what you want from an advisor. Make sure that you've got that rapport, making sure that there's a complete alignment of what your objectives are, so that the advisor can work with you on achieving those objectives, because it's no good having different objectives or the advisor thinking you want to go somewhere where you don't want to go. So ultimately, but there's plenty out there. People think, well, where do I find them? Well, I get contacted by people all the time who want to build an NED or a consultancy portfolio. So there's plenty of people out there on LinkedIn, or there's organisations like NED Connections or NED Exchange that advertise NEDs who are looking for positions. So there is no shortage of people. I think finding the right person does take time and should take time, because it's a really important decision. And also you want to make sure that that person has got the time to give you, but also that the cost of that is proportionate to what the level of expertise you're getting, and also proportionate to the budget that you've set aside for it.
No, that makes sense. I love that. So going back, because we've discussed so much about finance and acquisition, let's peel it right the way back to what makes a good business great. So how do they become such a great business that they are even growing beyond the launch?
Yeah, I mean, if I had the answer to that fully, I'd probably be a very rich man. But as we know, there is no one size fits all and no one answer fits all to that question. But as we've said earlier, basically at least having a plan is a good starting point. So I think a lot of, you ask 100 SME business owners, where's your business plan? And probably 90 of them will say we haven't got one. And even if they have one, then have they got the right key performance indicators? Have they got the right growth opportunities identified? Have they got the right resourcing plan in place in that plan to then go and execute it? So I think the starting point is having a plan about how far you want to grow and how you're going to grow. And then secondly, making sure that plan is kept up to date and regularly revisited and used, because it doesn't want to be stuck in a drawer and never brought out again. That's because it gets out of date quickly. So I think that's the first thing. I think secondly is making sure that you've got something, that you're selling something that people want to buy and not that you just want to sell. So ultimately having having a good product or a good service is vitally important. Now, that doesn't mean to say it has to be unique, because as we know, there's very few things in this world that are unique and soon get copied if they are. So it's just having a product or service that is actually value for money, really, really satisfies a client's demand and needs, is priced right, and that doesn't mean cheap, it means right, and it doesn't mean expensive either, but you can go there if you want to. So having all those things in place and then having the right marketing strategy behind it is also important. A lot of businesses don't invest in sales and marketing and business development because they think they can't afford to or think they don't need to. But actually, you can very rarely grow a business successfully without investing in sales and marketing and business development, both online and offline. And I think thirdly, about people, making sure that you've got the right people in your business, in the right roles, and that you are constantly encouraging them to learn and develop themselves, constantly communicating with them so they know what journey their business is on, as well as what journey they're on personally within that business, and then making sure that you give them the development opportunities to flourish, because that's what you want to do. I remember I was in banking, I built a great team around me that made me look good because they were better than me. So that's what you want to do in business. You want to build and recruit people who are actually better than you. And actually that makes you look good, makes your business look good. And actually that's going to help you to grow. And lastly, I'm sorry to go back to finance, but I think it is important that people understand that growing a business costs money. You're generally speaking investing in people, you're investing in sales and marketing, and it costs money to do that. So ultimately having a budget set aside, a financial budget set aside to invest in those things is important, and early planning in that is also vital, because what you don't want to do is get halfway through then suddenly run out of money. You want to make sure you've got a budget, you've got it funded, and nothing wrong with borrowing money to do that. Nothing wrong with doing that at all. Just make sure you borrow from the right place at the right price, in the right way, using the right product. So ultimately, there's plenty of financial support out there for growing businesses, but you will not be able to access it without a plan, a set of financial forecasts, a sales and marketing strategy, and a really good story about what your growth opportunities and what that's going to deliver for you over what period of time.
Okay, no, that sounds great. Do you know what? Going back to finance then, Gary, because I know that you love it and I don't, and I think that's probably why in the past I know we've had conversations, and I think when we first spoke and you'd ask me questions about finance, and it used to make me feel really uncomfortable because I'd be like, oh, I don't know that, and sometimes when you're trying to run a business and you don't know everything within your business, but you're trying to learn and obviously catch up to speed as you are growing, what would you say are like the main kind of metrics to do with your finance that you need to be kind of looking at so that you know whether you're growing or even on track, like you're growing that year on year? Okay,
it's a really great question again. What I would say is the common theme, again, around SME business owners is that finance is often their weakest point. So you weren't uncommon in that respect, I've got to say, but you did something about it. You went on a program, learned about financial ratios and financial strategy, and did something about it, which is what all business owners should do. So I don't want them to feel embarrassed about not understanding finance as much as they should do, but go and do something about it. Get some training, get some learning, even if it's online. But in answer to your second part of the question about what are the key metrics, again, it depends on what business and what sector in, because everything's different. But ultimately, what you're looking at setting targets for revenue growth, so percentage growth in revenue. You're looking at your margins, both gross margin and net margin, because ultimately, looking at your costs in your business drives and your pricing. I'll talk about pricing in a second, but looking at your costs drives margin. Reduce your costs, you drive your margin up. Increase your costs, drive your margin down. So ultimately, understanding your costs, understanding your gross and net margin and what your targets are and why you're potentially undershooting or overshooting those is important. Understanding your people costs is really important because generally speaking, The more you grow, the more you invest in people. Yes, technology is great and it can do so much, but still people are needed. So understanding your people costs and the challenges of retention, reward and recruitment shouldn't be underestimated in terms of their costs. But I also think in terms of pricing, you've got a bit, I said earlier, didn't I? That's really important. And understanding what you should be charging in relation to your competition and why. What makes you gives you the ability to charge more, or why you think it's okay to charge less. So, and again, the reason why it is important is because that drives margin, and margin is the key to everything. It's no good being a busy fool. It's no good reaching 1 million turnover and more if you're losing money. I always say my sole purpose in working with my clients is to help them accelerate the growth in their revenues, in their profitability, because one is no good without the other, and ultimately the valuation of their businesses so that they achieve the maximum value on exit. You can't do that if you haven't got a proper pricing strategy in place.
No, and I completely agree with that. And I think just making sure that you've looked at all of those things, there's quite a lot to think about, isn't there, really? But we're talking about so many different areas, and just like looking at the finance, looking at the strategy, looking at the plan, executing it as well. But ultimately, as a business owner, how do you manage to find that balance and fit it all in, Gary? Like you're talking about people as well. How do you make it all happen without dropping the ball in one area of the business?
Yeah, well, you get help, and not just advice externally, but as I said earlier, you build a team around you. I've seen businesses fail because business owners ran a business that's many million pounds of turnover with many tens of even hundreds of people, and they're running it in the same way as when they had a startup. And it's all about them. It's all about them making all the decisions. They're making the wrong decisions because they haven't got time to make the right ones. Their quality of life's poor. It's just not the right thing to do. Grow your people, grow your management team to support you to grow that business in the areas where potentially you're weak. So when you're big enough, recruit a financial controller or a finance director. Recruit somebody in sales and marketing. Even if that's outsourced, still have some sort of resource that you've got to draw upon from a sales and marketing expertise. Have a HR manager, or at least a support organisation helping you with HR issues, because every business has them from time to time. We know that. So, draw upon different areas of expertise to create a management team supported internally and externally to help you grow your business, freeing you up to think about strategy, freeing you up to think about acquisition, freeing you up to think about, I better go and raise some finance. Or just making sure that your best clients are being looked after. Because it's okay going after new clients, which every business has to do. But if you and your team are not looking after your best clients and they are slipping through the net as quick as you're putting new clients on, what's the point? The low-hanging fruit is your own clients, your current clients. What can you do with them? That's where you should spend your focus, or part of your focus, as well as I say, in terms of overall financial strategy, overall growth strategy, and looking after your people as well, because they need you as the business owner to support them. You should be mentoring them, you should be coaching them, you should be making sure their appraisals are done and listening to them. Because your people and your management team will be the difference between success and failure for your business.
No, I like that. I think that's really true. One last thing that I want to ask you, Gary, just to wrap up, because taken so much of your time already, and you've added so much value already, and it's been quite fascinating hearing about all of these different areas that business owners need to kind of consider as they're growing. What would you say that a business owner that is looking to grow, what kind of like attitudes or kind of mindset do they need to have to be in that kind of zone of preparing themselves for growth? Like, what would you say that might even be like the behaviours, attitudes or qualities that they need to have to be able to achieve that?
Well, you know, Stephen Covey, when he wrote his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I would recommend every business owner to read, it's a very old book, but still very relevant, says, be positive, choose your attitude. And I think that's number one, because if you haven't got the right attitude when you turn up to work every day, how can you expect your team to have the right attitude? You know, how can you expect your team to be positive if you're not positive? That doesn't mean to say, you know, you're not going to have setbacks. You are, because that's what business is. Business growth is not a straight line. It is a curve, and those curves have lows and highs. So ultimately, expect to have different speeds of growth as you go through the years, and different pace of growth as well. So don't think it's all going to come easy. It is really hard work. But as I said earlier, be prepared to take those risks that are required. Be prepared to continue to invest in yourself as a business owner, whether it's going on the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program, or whether it's taking an MBA or joining Institute of Directors or whatever. Continue to invest in yourself as a business owner and continue to learn and improve, because the day you stop learning is the day you stop living, is what I say. So, you know, continuing to learn is one of life's great pleasures, in my opinion, and actually just makes you an all-round better person. So ultimately, those are the things which I would say you've got to have inside you. Be a balanced risk taker, but a risk taker. Be constantly learning. Be there for your people. Build a team, and basically make sure that you've got a great product or service that people want to buy, and make sure that you've got a great strategy how to get that product to market to the people who want to buy it.
Oh, that's great. So I'm just going to wrap up this episode by saying thank you so much, Gary, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure and honour working with you, obviously externally to this episode, with you being our non-exec director, but also with you sharing your knowledge and support and wisdom to us throughout the years. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. Please subscribe to find out more about our future episodes. And also, if you've got any comments or thoughts about what we've discussed today, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.